I think that we are likely to see some real changes from the Biden period. I do think the Ukraine war is likely to end, and that's a hugely beneficial thing. I think there's actually more likely to be peace in the Middle East and between the US and China than was true of the Biden administration. Trump believes in going it alone, but he's not especially warlike. He doesn't like international rules. He doesn't like the UN. He has pulled out the first day, the US, from the Paris Climate Agreement and from the World Health Organization. This is part of the Trump idea that any global rules are a constraint on American freedom and sovereignty. I don't agree with this. I think countries agree together to do things for a reason because it's mutually beneficial. But in the Trump ideology, agreements with other countries is just a constraint on your own action. So he believes in unilateralism, but he doesn't especially believe in war. In fact, I think on balance, he will avoid war even more than Biden did. Biden represented the mainstream military-industrial complex of the United States. In the mainstream U.S. approach, war is part of American power. For Trump, I think tariffs, threats, embargoes, isolation, other things are more the arsenal that he likes. Trump is going to be nasty in the Western Hemisphere, probably more than he's going to be in the Eastern Hemisphere. So I'd be more worried today in Canada or Mexico than in China. Let's put it that way. With Canada and Mexico, Trump doesn't exactly know or care where the borders are necessarily. He thinks Canada is part of the United States. He thinks Mexico is a pain in the neck for the United States, and he'll do what he wants to do. And so I wouldn't feel very comfortable being the United States' next door neighbor right now. But when it comes to China, he didn't mention China in the inaugural address. He said he wants peace, and I rather believe that, actually, at least peace among the major powers. I think the other thing to say about Trump is he believes that the United States is exceptional, and he believes that the big powers are different from all the rest of the world. He rather likes big, powerful countries and powerful leaders. And so I think actually whatever he does on trade and tariffs and other things, which will not be friendly necessarily to China, he will want a good relationship with President Xi Jinping. He'll want a good relationship with Vladimir Putin. This is not the same with Biden. Maybe also Biden's health or status, we don't know, prevented diplomacy, but Biden was completely uninterested in normal diplomacy among leaders. Trump is much more interested. So it's a mixed bag. Again, if I were Panama, Canada, Mexico, I'd be pretty nervous today. But being in China and in Hong Kong, I think it's a pretty benign start. Nothing surprising, if anything, less antagonistic than one might have expected. Trump says he wants to visit China. That's a good thing. Absolutely. I hope that happens. Trump says he wants peace. I really hope that happens because that's the single most important issue for the whole world. And he didn't even mention in his inaugural all the other threats to the world trading system. So let's see. But first day, we've all survived it. America is now much less bound by international rules, but not going to war, at least between the major powers.
I'd like to at least to supplement some of the point first. And I think this is the first day of the Trump 2.0. And I think the whole world is going to be looking at this with tremendous amount of interest and anxiety. And, some corners with pleasure. I think, in my mind, what is really going to change from now is that the norms or the sort of a rule or order that we have been all used to for the last 50 years are going to be changed. And because, so essentially, the new administration is going to disrupt that norm or that order. And so it's all the issues. That order obviously was originally established and maintained by the United States, and the United States is the biggest beneficiary of that order.
Yeah.
And I think that is no longer believed in America. And obviously, with that norm being disrupted, the whole world is going to look very, very differently, because either you are a beneficiary of it, or you grow into a comfort with it and be able to, secure your good positions in there. But now that is going to change, and that require you to respond. So I think, the world is just going to have a complete upside down in many, many ways. But that also means that, the table is going to get reset. And I think,
do you think China, or specifically Hong Kong, is a beneficiary of the old world order?
Well, in so many ways, everybody is a beneficiary of that order, and then everybody dislikes some elements of that order. And so I don't think anybody is always completely happy with that. And even America, part of America love that order and would love to continue to maintain that order, but part of America think that order has totally ignored them. So they wanted to disrupt that order. The same as this with any other country, any other region. Even China, when you use the word China as if there's only one China, there are many elements of China. Some of the part were beneficiary of that order, and some of the part could be the beneficiary of the disruption of that order. So I just think we just all need to, the puzzle is being dispersed, the old puzzle, we need to re-put the puzzle back together. And I think it's a much more interesting world. And it's a world that's full of challenges, but you need to be agile and adapting. And it is not a world that you can just, like the one that you can stay there. And so a lot of things could change.
Professor Zhang.
And it reminds me of the allegedly very famous remark made by Henry Kissinger. It's dangerous to be the enemy of the United States, but it's fatal to be the ally of the United States. And when I look at this situation, as you mentioned, Canada, Denmark, and Greenland, whatever, this remark comes to my mind. And indeed, I think China can most probably play some very important role, because China is already the largest trading partner with over 140 countries. If really Donald Trump and his America decide to withdraw from globalization, we will carry on globalization, new style. We are in this position, de facto the largest economy by purchasing power parity since a decade. So the world will become different. Yeah, but China is perhaps slightly more ready than many other countries to cope with Donald Trump.
Let me ask something very specifically and see how it is received in Hong Kong and over in the West. Just before the inauguration, a couple of weeks ago, actually, end of 2024, China launched the two sixth-generation fighter jets, and an amphibian vessel, and another drone carrier, all within a week. Do you think that message is well received? I mean, well, with quote unquote, well received by the Trump administration. Was it necessary for the sake of world peace to show your muscle at that particular time?
I don't think that it makes much difference whether it's 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after. The basic point is we have three military superpowers armed to the teeth. And you could add India also as a major nuclear power that is also not so powerful in the conventional arms, but significant globally. None of these three powers can defeat the other, even conceptually, other than through world self-annihilation. In other words, the only threat that China faces from the United States is tantamount to a full nuclear war. The only threat that the United States faces from China is tantamount to a full nuclear war. The United States could not defeat Russia. Russia could not defeat the United States. Given all of this, the fact of the matter is we're actually secure, the major powers, if we don't blow up the world. The only risk to the major powers is world destruction. So if we stay out of each other's lane a bit, keep space between each other, don't provoke each other, the world actually is stable. The problem of the last 30 years was that the United States didn't know that there were two other superpowers whose lanes they kept crossing. So the United States thought Russia was a pushover, nothing to worry about. If we want to expand NATO to Ukraine, nothing Russia can do. If we want to expand NATO to the Caucasus region, nothing to do. If we want to expand NATO to Central Asia, nothing Russia can do. Well, the Ukraine war resulted from that kind of thinking, and it proved that the United States cannot beat Russia in its own neighborhood with conventional arms, and that any attempt to escalate, Russia would escalate, and we'd be on the way to world destruction. So the United States, I think, learned a lesson from this. Well, let me put it this way. The United States should learn a lesson from this, which is that its own behavior was obnoxious, provocative, and dangerous. The question is, did the United States learn the same lesson vis-a-vis China? Because there obviously are two provocations by the US in China. One is Taiwan, and the other is the South China Sea. And if the United States is halfway sensible, it will say, we're not going to disturb you in your own neighborhood. This is your own business. And if the US does that, there will be peace, there will be normal relations, there will be mutual security. If the United States says, well, we can do what we want, or it's worth provoking China, there will be disaster. Trump is probably a little bit less likely to provoke China than Biden was. Biden's administration was really incompetent, and they were rude to China, did not engage in diplomacy with China. A couple of meetings were held so that not everything fell apart. But basically, it was a terrible administration. The United States is in a very confused mood. And when I say the United States, all I mean is the elite in the security system. Because the U.S. mentality, and Trump expressed it in his inaugural addresses, the U.S. is the exceptional country. And if you take that belief seriously, you end up creating a lot of trouble, because other countries just want you out of their front yard or backyard. And so whether Trump gets that and uses restraint, that's the major test of his presidency, actually. A smart president is one who exercises restraint in the mutual interest of the major powers. A stupid president is one who provokes the other major powers. And so this is Trump's single biggest challenge, because the world's fate depends on this kind of challenge. Trump said that he understands Putin's point of view, that, in other words, if he were Putin, and I'm putting a little bit of words in Trump's mouth, but if he were Putin, he'd understand why NATO enlargement wouldn't look good. If he does the same thing, putting himself in China's perspective, and sees the United States arming Taiwan over China's big objections, or militarizing further the South China Sea, and building up missile systems, building up AUKUS, building up military relations, urging Japan to remilitarize and so forth, he would understand that the U.S. is provoking a lot of the reaction that it is pointing to, and rather both sides should calm down. Look, the United States, Trump can't even accept Greenland as being an independent country. He thinks Canada is a state. What he's really saying is, this is our The Americas are our backyard.
He wants to see passageway, right? Is that the reason why?
Look, there are many reasons, but it's a kind of crude American imperialism, I would say, that goes back to his favorite president of 1896, William McKinley. So it basically says, this is our neighborhood. Don't encroach on it. Now, the point I'm making is not that it's right to threaten Mexico or Canada, but if Trump uses the same logic just a little bit and understands China's point of view about America's actions, he would then adopt a more restrained point of view. And if he does and says, you know, we don't want to have war with China over the South China Sea or war with China over Taiwan, this would improve global security incredibly. So all of this is to say, yes, China's making huge advances in many arms systems, in missile systems, in nuclear, in hypersonic systems, and so on. Not surprising. But we don't want an arms race. We want mutual restraint. And this is really the question of whether the two sides can be smart enough to say, if we back off a little bit, don't encroach on each other's core interests, then the tensions will come down and we could actually make more money, have a better life, have more security, and so on.
But I agree that the big powers are wise enough, and I at least hope that they won't really engage in a pattern of activity that ultimately lead to mutual destruction. And I think we also agree that the U.S. has a lot to do, can do a lot to restrain so that it does not really have a slippery slope to get into it. But it's also important that we know, and the world know, that the Chinese leadership has thousands of years of wisdom behind it. And the key is also, we can hope that the U.S. is going to be smart enough not to do certain things to provoke it. But it's also important to we also know that even if you intentionally or unintentionally or, by mistake did anything, that we're not going to get into a Ukraine situation, because the worst is that U.S. may be just poking, some issues, troubles here and there. We're not going to fall into the trap. And I have great confidence in our leaders that China will handle the world affairs like a real adult. And I think I agree with Professor Sachs that we are not on that slippery slope, but it's important not to get close to that slippery slope, because sometimes things happen beyond your control once you are on the slippery slope.
Right. I'm going to double click on the word China wisdom, and I'm going to ask each one of you gentlemen to maybe sum it up in the most concise way possible, because there's been so much like official talks, diplomatic talks about Chinese wisdom, how a world where the narrative is incorporating Chinese wisdom, the Chinese model, Chinese way of thinking is going to be a more peaceful, more sustainable world order. That's been said in so many occasions, but I don't think if people hear it, they think about it as another diplomatic jargon. So really, does it make a difference? Like the cultural, the civilizational traits of China, and when you say China wisdom, what specifically is it? Because I don't think a lot of Westerners are hearing it. We're saying it, but they're not hearing it.
Well, in my mind, it's just one word in Chinese proverb, 以静制动. React to action with inaction. You do not act, you observe, there's no great English translation for 以静制动.
The funny thing is, the TikTok refugees that they float to Red Note. Actually, one of the screenshot that I saw is it's in English. It's very American. They said, "Oh, China, do nothing, win."
Yeah,
and that's close to it, no?
That's really do nothing until you see something, and not trying to preempt every other move the other side has made. Just stay, and the adult stays.
When the United States became the world's largest economy, roughly in 1890s, it started war against Spain and conquered Cuba and the Philippines and other territories. When China became the world's largest economy by purchasing power parity in 2014, technically, China can, take back all these islands in South China Sea within 24 hours. But
Militarily, you mean?
China did not do that militarily. We prefer to have negotiated solution. So this is a kind of wisdom. In a way, for instance, now we consider Philippines as a troublemaking country from Chinese point of view, but we use water cannons rather than shooting guns, cannons, whatever. But we have also put the situation under control. As a result, we have this whole friendship, unity, and prosperity with ASEAN, because Philippines' behavior, whatever, is not that even welcome within ASEAN. And the Chinese way to handle it is also well received in ASEAN. So this is one way to see how we can do these things with these kind of tough and hot issues. If we use wisdom with Philippines, politics goes ups and downs, you have slightly longer vision. That's a key difference between China and the United States in terms of this world outlook, international relations. For the United States, it's a friend or foe, either with us or against us. For Chinese, you see, Chinese wisdom is friend or potential friend. You have a longer vision.
One thing I do not agree with Professor Zhang is that Professor Zhang liked to go back saying that China is already number one from a purchasing power perspective. Right. I don't know why we wanted to do that. And it's a technical explanation of some economic rules that could potentially put China number one. I don't think China wanted to be number one. Why do we want to be number one? Because there's a responsibility coming, from being number one. And that itself is not terribly Chinese. Chinese, we want it to be number two, number three. It's okay. We don't need to be number one. We just mind our own business and do our things right and help ourselves help the world and be a responsible neighbor. And we don't need to be the cop and the big boy on the block and telling other people what to do. We just want to be left alone.
No, the point is, especially in the field of geopolitics, if you underestimate your own power, your own strengths, could also create serious problems.
You can overestimate yourself, but you don't tell everybody about it.
In fact, In fact, when this last governor of Hong Kong launched his so-called political reform in Hong Kong, he thought China's economic size is smaller than UK, because by this US dollar-based calculation, it was. So at that time, Russia made a huge lesson. It said, United States treated Russia as if its economy the size of Spain. So it pushed this expansion of NATO, and even at risk of war. So Putin today only mentioned purchasing power parity. Russia is the largest economy in Europe, larger than Germany.
Because I believe, saying you're number one, both create external anxiety and creating unnecessary internal stress. Because if we all believe we are number one, we become cocky, we become arrogant. The Chinese are not that. And if you think your opponents or the rest of the world think you're number one, and then they are going to become more demanding and more challenging and more anxiety, greater anxiety, because I think that you're coming to potentially change the world. And I'm very happy, at least in my life, I'm very happy always to be number two, number three, never one. So I want Professor Sachs sitting in the middle, and we are surrounding you and paying deference to you.
But do you think that some level of confidence or cockiness is necessary for China now? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I hear things left, right, and center that I get confused as well. Is the Chinese economy still strong, going strong, or is the Chinese economy hitting some sort of or going off some sort of a peak with the real estate market is down, the stock market is down, the consumer confidence is down? I mean, which way is it? I don't know.
China has a very strong economy, and it's going to continue to be even stronger in the future. And the basic reason is that China is technologically dynamic, and it is already at the forefront of a large number of technologies that are the key technologies for the next 30 years. Electric vehicles, zero carbon energy systems, fourth generation nuclear, of course, battery supply chains, hydrogen economy, advanced shipping, 5.5G. These are the technologies that the world needs to make the energy transformation, to make the digital transformation. And China is very strong and very dynamic also in those technologies. And the manufacturing ecosystem, especially where we are in the Greater Bay Area, is absolutely extraordinary. I would say unique in the world. So, what's said in the media day to day, well, that's day-to-day news, but China, like any large economy, has ups and downs and quarters that are bad or quarters that are good, and the COVID was a disruption and so forth. But you have to look at the fundamentals, and the fundamentals are very, very strong. And that's very good, because not only is it good for China, it's good for the world. I do want to come back to this question about China's statecraft. And just to say, of course, we can theorize, but I would point to two historical facts that I think are positive and important. First, China hasn't been in any war for more than 40 years. This is extraordinary. The U.S. has been at war basically every day for the last 40 years, and usually in a number of places. China had a 1-month war with Vietnam in 1979 and since then. And that kind of long peace is, I think, the best evidence we have about China's statecraft right now. There's another historical piece of evidence that I think I personally believe in, though it's argued and debated among historians and scholars, and that is there was a long, long period of several hundred years, basically 500 years, of what has been called the Confucian peace in the region of China, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, lasting really from the beginning of the Ming Dynasty until the British invasion of China in 1839 and the First Opium War. And so this long period almost had no war at all. Now, China was undoubtedly then, whether it's PPP or market prices, though the concept didn't exist of GDP, it was by far the dominant power. But China didn't invade Japan. China never in its history invaded Japan, except when the Mongols were briefly running things from in 1274 and 1281. Other than that, for 700 years, it was never an invasion from China to Japan. China never invaded Korea in its history, as far as I know. China invaded Vietnam, yes, 6 centuries ago, in 1410 or so. So this is a long, long peace. And I think that is part of China's statecraft. It is part of a Confucian order, if one could call it that. I believe that that's true. Some of my colleagues in the US say, oh, no, that's not true. China has to be like every other country, which in their mind is war all the time, because in America, it's war all the time. And why? Well, Europe has been basically at war for 1,000 years. And the fundamental difference is China unified and mainly stayed unified for 2,000 years, whereas Europe was fragmented. Then it colonized other parts of the world, and they fought. Even Donald Trump in his inaugural address, he expressed the kind of 1950s happy vision of America, that we fought our way across the continent. It was a very bloody bunch of conquests by colonial power. We're not supposed to say that in Trump's America, but the truth is it was an expansionist imperial period. And that's a different history from China's history. So bottom line for me is there really could be a big difference of statecraft. China, cautious, friends or potential friends, and this makes a lot of sense. We had one sensible president during my lifetime, which was President Kennedy, who tried peace, and he had a very wonderful line. He said, across the gulfs and barriers that now divide us, we must remember there are no permanent enemies. Hostility today is a fact, but it is not a ruling law. And so he talked about the fact that don't think about enemies and friends, but when you get to Biden, it's all, you're our friend, you're our enemy. And that's the mentality that's so dangerous.